Welcome to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. You can send questions for each show on Twitter using the hashtag IndieBeacon. Now sit back and enjoy learning about our guest for this show.
Hi, this is your host, Beyond Bourgeois, and we are at Indie Beacon Radio with our show. Jim Garrison is our guest today, who has written two books. As you can see behind him, one of them is presented because the other one's due out shortly. QL4, Jim. Let's start with that one. Tell us a little bit about it.
Okay. Alan, thanks for having me on the show. I do appreciate it. I think that's a big help for authors to have this kind of an interview format. QL4 is the first book I wrote, and it actually started back in 2003, I guess it was. It's set in Vietnam, in the Mekong Delta during the Vietnam War, and it grew out of my experiences there as a military policeman in 1970. And I can go on and tell you about its genesis if you like, or Okay, the thing about QL4 is that when I left Vietnam, going on 50 years ago, I didn't want to think any more about it. I just wanted to be away from the place and done with it. And I didn't read anything or write anything or hardly anything at all for about 20 years or so. And then because of something I read in the book by Tim O'Brien called The Things They Carried, I kind of got back into it. So then I probably told my kids a little bit about it. And then in 2002, I was working for a Texaco joint venture, and there was a merger and I was paid to go away. And my wife thought that I was going to go back to work and be a lawyer and stay away from the house a lot. And so, I took some time off. We traveled a bit. And then my son, who is an artist and was living in New York, bet me or said I should write a book. I guess I tell a lot of tales or have over the years of various sorts. And I started thinking about it, and he gave me a book on how to write your first novel. And so I started getting into that and sending out a few resumes to, lawyer type things. And I finally decided, really what I really love now is to write and read some good literature. First thing I did when I had time off was to read the unabridged version of War and Peace, which was a slog. And so I started writing QL4. And QL4 percolated up from my memory because it's the sort of experience that you don't forget. And I started on it probably in 2003. And I wrote a draft out longhand, and then I typed it up, and it was probably boring as hell. And I think my wife has told me that after she admitted it years later. And I had some folks read it, and I thought, I can't write a memoir because I don't really have anything that's worthy of a memoir. At least I didn't think I did. And I've read a lot of the crime novels over the years, Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, like mysteries and that sort of thing. And I said, what I need to do is to actually develop a story. And I was thinking about it. And the thing about Vietnam, about where I was, and I was a military policeman, is that the black market was a big thing there. And there was a lot of people who made a lot of money on the black market. And I thought, well, I need a book that's based on the black market and a crime novel. And that'll be interesting with some of the experiences that I had. And I did draw on the experiences. I drew particularly on the images that I still had in my mind. the sunrises as we went out on patrol in the morning over the rice paddies, the smell in the canal, the houses built up on stilts along the canal. I still had these images stayed with me, as well as some others that were far less pleasant. So I built those into the book, and the first people I read said, well, this sounds like a memoir, or this, and I said, well, I got to gin it up, make it more crime stuff, and I did that, and I took some courses at Rice, and the continuing education courses, and short story courses in particular, and I got some good suggestions as to the characters that people liked. And I thought I had the book finished finally about 2007. I thought I had an agent and ready to go, and I didn't. He finally turned the book down. He says, well, nothing ever happens here. And I said, well, that was the idea. We didn't want anything to happen. And if you read the book, you get into it and you see that the main character, Bell, his whole idea is that he doesn't want anything to happen. He gets over there and he decides that he just wants to be like he's home watching Walter Cronkite news and avoiding all the bad stuff. And of course, it doesn't work out like that. And I drew Bell. I was in law school when I was drafted and sent to the Mekong Delta. But I made Bell into a literary guy, because I majored in English and history in college. And I really liked, all of that stuff, Shakespeare, Milton, and, the modern novels. And so I made him hopefully more of a wuss than even I was. But he's a military policeman, and he's packing a 45, and he's carrying an M16 around, and sometimes he's got an M60 on the Jeep. And so he's telling his guys there, he says, I don't want to be involved. And of course, he gets involved. And then you get to the point that you got to make some decisions. You got to decide, am I going to do something or am I not? And so eventually I drew the book along probably about draft 10. But in the meantime, let me tell you, when I retired and decided to be a writer, I said, I'm getting older here. I got to get this stuff down on paper while I still have a good mind. And I had a lawyer friend who worked with one of the big firms, and he got Alzheimer's, and he went around taking pictures of the people he knew so he could have a scrapbook and remember them. And I remembered that. And I thought, I got to get the things I want to say on paper. And so I ended up, in the meantime, I wrote a second novel, which was about 160,000 words, and nobody would want to publish that. It was sci-fi. And then I wrote a third novel, which is the one that I got coming out hopefully at the end of this year. And then I wrote a fourth novel. I didn't get to the fourth novel until about the time I got QL4 published. But the way I got am I going on too much about what I did? My background as a lawyer is I can talk, okay? And, I found that very useful as a writer, is I never had a problem putting stuff down on the page. I could just sit down and just keep going. And in fact, one of the problems is putting too many words on the page. And most of the publishers, they want something, okay, less than 100,000 words. But unless it's historical fiction or a sci-fi novel. So I ended up sending out, I did short stories and poetry too. And I'm sending all these out to literary journals, and I'm trying to get short stories published, poetry published. I'm sending out letters to agents, queries to agents. I'm going to conferences, Pikes Peak Writers Conference. We've got the Houston Writers Guild here, Writers League of Texas. I'm doing all of this, meeting people. I'm pitching the books. And the way I got my agent and her name is Johnny Barnard, and she has her own books out now.
Mhm.
But Johnny had put a little note on one of the probably Houston Writers Guild sites, wanting I don't know what you call it, beta reader. Is that it?
Yeah.
Somebody to read. And, I said, okay, I'll give you one of my books and you give me yours, and, we'll read each other's. And we did. And we had a good time doing it. And she gave me some good suggestions. Hopefully I gave her some good suggestions. And she's got 2 published books now. The first was A Good Girl, which is the one I read. And the irony is that after she read my book, she went on to become an agent. And her first, I guess, her call to me is that, Jim, I'd like to get the Safecracker, which is the one she had read. And I said, wow, that's really nice. And, I'd have an agent, and, that gives you access to publishers. And so I said, but, I got another book that I really want to get out there first, which was QL4. So she took that and she ran with it, and she sent it out, beautiful job in getting it to a lot of different publishers, including some editors I had had contacts with before. But we ended up with Touchpoint Press, and Touchpoint Press published the book in 2017. And they did a nice job on it. It's on Amazon and paperback and Kindle.
Let me stop you real quickly so we can talk a little bit more about QL4 before we go to a break. The fact that you were in Vietnam and you had a lot of different people that you were associated with, did you use those people as part of your characters, or did you create new characters to fill the book? How did you come about that?
Well, we are a part of all we have met. And I've seen that in a couple places. Virginia Woolf was one. And so the people who were there really made a big impression on me. All of the people I met in the Army, because they were unique from my academic background. And I'll come back to that in a second. But I made an amalgam of different characteristics of different people I came across. And, both Americans and Vietnamese. There's one guy, though, who pretty much he's the only name I used as a real person. His name was Mo, and I won't give his last name, but I found out from another guy, a couple of my comrade in arms from Vietnam who caught up with me last year, that Mo had died. But I used Mo because he was a red-headed Irishman and a character you'd never forget. The rest of the folks were kind of a mesh of people and events that I came across. For example, one of the characters in there is just absolutely devoted to his wife, and he gets a Dear John letter, and it has the predictable consequence. And I remember I mentioned to you that the things they carried had really, the first thing I had read that struck me, that got me back into Vietnam, and that was in the 90s. And in the things they carried, they mentioned, the author mentions, they carried a P-38 can opener, which I don't know if you've ever seen a P-38. It's just a little thing, about that big, and there's a flap that flaps open, and you can open a C rations can opener, with it. And when I was in basic training, which was to me as traumatic almost as Vietnam, there was a guy who got a Dear John letter while we were on bivouac in the middle of the day, and he tried to slit his wrist with a P-38 can opener. And I remembered that, and it was like, all of a sudden, all this stuff started coming back, and my interest, and then I started reading a lot of other stuff. And so in the book, I've got not something similar, but the same psychological event for one of the characters. I had another guy, there are two counterpoints when I was pulling MP duty. And I ought to tell you, one of the ways I researched my book is I had all the letters I sent my mother, all the letters I sent my brother, which they'd given me back to. And a friend of mine, who was a girl that I had dated off and on, and we exchanged letters while I was in Vietnam, she gave me back some of my letters. And one of those letters, I used those for my research. I used the tapes that I dictated home. But in one of those letters, when I started reading back through it, I found I talked about one of the first guys I pulled duty with. And he was an avowed Nazi, and expressly. And he said the Gestapo was the best police there ever was. Okay, he's one of the guys, and he's in the book. Not completely like he was in real life, but then another one of the guys was this black guy from Alabama who had, lived through the stuff with the Klan and all that kind of stuff, and he was a Black Panther. And in fact, somewhere around here.
Well, during break, why don't you pull that out? But let's take a quick break because we have to let our sponsors do their thing, and
Sure.
Then we'll come back. Tom Gromes, father of market intelligence, writing business books that are a game changer. International author of nonfiction, has written the first and only books on the collapse of Russia and the first and only book on market intelligence. Check them out at mkintel.org. That's mkintel.org, mkintel.org.
Love to read? Love to meet authors in person? Then check out bookfestival.network to find a book festival in your region of Texas. We are adding book festival events throughout the year, so sign up to get notices and even a coupon towards purchase of a Texas author's book. Sign up at bookfestival.network.
What would you do if you had to put your life on hold to parent your parents? You have to laugh to keep from crying how to parent your parents, as they must read the book, full of antidotes and practical advice to help parenting your parents. Author Charlotte Kenyon provides insights to help prepare anyone facing the challenges of caring for elderly parents. Check out our website at www.howtoparentyourparents.net.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. Don't forget to like us, follow us, or subscribe to one of our many channels. Now, here is your host for today's show.
All righty, welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. This is your host, Beyond Bourgeois. I have Jim Garrison with me, who's written QL4, but you also have another book that's getting ready to come out. Can you briefly tell us about that?
Okay, this book is The Safecracker, and it's a legal thriller. Involves both a safecracker, who is a professional in his trade, and an escape artist, and two young lawyers who join a law firm in North Carolina in order to save the world by assisting in cities and developing an alternative energy project, which is both visionary, especially at the time because it's 1980 and it's in the middle of the Iran hostage crisis and the oil shortage. And they become, the firm ends up breaking up, and the one lawyer, Patricia Egan, has the safecracker as a client. His name's Billy Angel. And Patricia and Billy become the targets of some well-heeled local politicians and business people who want to shut them up. because they have discovered that there is, separately through their own avenues, that there's a scheme to skim money off of municipal bonds and industrial bond revenues that are being issued for this alternative energy project. It's an old story, but it happens. And the third character, and it's from 3 points of view. The third character, Jack Alexander, happens to be Patricia's fiance's best friend, and he shares an old house with her after her fiance leaves for the military. And Jack is actually solicited to join this conspiracy, which involves buying up land to be used for the alternative energy project, and then flipping the properties to get bigger and bigger loans until they will sell the land to the cities for the energy project. And so Jack is he wants, poor boy, he wants to get rich, and this may be the avenue to do it. Patricia, on the other hand, is just an idealistic young lawyer who wants to make the world a better place. And the only reason she's representing Billy Angel is because the firm has fallen on hard times and she has to take appointed cases because she wants to help salvage the law firm. And I had a lot of fun with the book. It's far more fluff than QL4.
And when do you plan on having it out?
Well, the schedule is I'm supposed to be doing the final edits with the publisher's editor next month, and then it just depends on when in the cycle they can get it out. Probably toward, I'm hoping toward the end of the summer or in the fall. I found this is a long process.
Yes, it is. Before the break, you were talking about the two characters that you knew personally as well as used in the book. One of them was a Nazi and the other one was a Black Panther. And we had to take a break, but you were getting ready to show us something about the Black Panther gentleman.
Yes. I actually ended up with one of the Black Panther magazines from the guy. And he was actually a pretty good cop, which was surprising because he was had a certain equilibrium that was good, at least in my memory. And this is not going to come to a good end when you have, like oil and water come together. So it made a good conflict for the book. And in many ways, the 60s were a period of lots of conflicts, which I tried to go into in the book. We had, the civil rights era was just in its fledgling, and you had Black soldiers who felt like they were fighting for freedoms they didn't have in the United States, and you had, Black versus white conflicts. You had Vietnamese versus American conflicts. You had the professional soldiers versus the draftees. And then even within the professional ranks, you had the enlisted men and the officers. So it was just, it's made, if you want tension and conflicts, there are just a lot of them there. Plus war, in my observation, just not in Vietnam, but looking around, it's an opportunity for unscrupulous people to make a lot of money. And
which actually is a question I had for you, because it seems with almost all wars, there ends up being a black market situation. And is there a reason for that? Do you know of, or psychological, or just the way nature is? What brings that about?
Well, I'm not sure. I know I've reading about Germany's in Europe's reconstruction is that it may in some ways have been like in the Vietnam War, is you had the Vietnamese people who were quite poor, who had been under colonial rule. And then the Americans come in with all this wealth. And it's like, you know, just the basic things like soda or toilet paper are important and not available in this society. And the Americans can go buy it in the PX, beer, cigarettes. Oh, cigarettes are probably one of the, you know, major exchange items. You know, I understand even in prison, cigarettes are, you know, at least in my reading, have become important for exchanges. So the GIs can buy this stuff, and then they can take it downtown and sell it at a premium. They make a profit, and the people they buy it from, the bars, you know, the prostitutes, you know, they can resell it and make money too. And there are, you know, in some of these times, there are even situations where war materials are sold in the black market and then end up with the other side. You know, I don't know that happened where I was, but, you know, I developed the story in order to bring in the black market, plus the currency exchange, is that we actually had a play money currency for the Americans in Vietnam, military payment certificates, which we used. And the military, and then, yeah, I'm not a currency expert, but I do know that many of these countries, I mean, if you went to Venezuela now, the dollar bill would certainly be worth a lot more on the streets than the official exchange rate. And in many of these countries, it has been like that. So in Vietnam, the military payment certificates were very valuable to the Vietnamese and far more valuable than the official exchange rates. So there's a currency exchange. The officials, the powers that be, decide that they need to change all the currencies out, and then only MPCs for MPCs. So that Vietnamese are desperate to turn in their MPCs, their military payment certificates, and get the new ones because the old ones become worthless. So that becomes part of the black market. India, I saw recently, they had a currency where the government tried to absorb all the large rupee notes because they were being used for corrupt activities.
Right.
Yeah.
You definitely have a lot of material to pull from and to use for future books. And we'll talk about that in just a moment, but we're going to take another break for our sponsor. We only have a couple minutes left, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
What would you do if you found out everyone on the town council were thieves and murderers? That's what happened in Bandera, Texas in 1873. John Cruder was the marshal, yet he needed to operate outside the law in order to balance the scales of justice. He is the Midnight Marauder. You can find his books on Amazon.com and TopWesterns.com in paperback, digital, and audio. I'm Roy Clinton, and I hope you'll read The Midnight Marauder.
Indie Lector is a store for serious readers and indie authors. Find great talent at indielector.store and save money on books with their book club. A portion of the proceeds helps get books into schools and libraries in need. Find a great book to read by an indie author at indielector.store.
Hi, Brakefield and Berkey here, award-winning authors for the Techno Thrillers books, the Enigma book series. Technology, today's weapon of choice, the cyber good guys versus the cyber bad guys.
We invite you to join our website, theenigmaseries.com, where you will get sample chapters, sample audibles, book trailers, and you can sign up for our mailing list. The books are available in ebook, paperback, and Audible. Thank you.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. Don't forget to like us, follow us, or subscribe to one of our many channels. Now, here is your host for today's show.
This is your host, B. Alan Bourgeois, and welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. We have with us Jim Garrison, who has been talking about his various books, QL4, which is out, and then his new one that's getting ready to come out the later part of the year, and also about Vietnam that he's dealt with and stuff. First off, let people know how they can find your books and how they can reach out to you to learn more about what you have planned and where you'll be and all that fun stuff.
Well, my QL4 is now available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback. It's also available through Barnes & Noble. You go into, I've sold it in small bookstores around Houston. If you go into any bookstore, they can just put the title in and it'll come up and the bookstore can order it for you if you'd like to order it that way. I'm working on additional books. The Safecracker will also be available on Amazon and Kindle and paperback. Is anything else you want to know on that, Alan?
Well, you mentioned you're working on other books. Can you give us just a real short brief what you're working on and how many you're working on?
Well, I have the last one I did is called What Seems True, and it's set in Port Arthur, Texas in 1980. What this book is based on a true crime that occurred at a small Texaco refinery in 1979, in which two white employees murdered the first black supervisor in this plant. The killers were husband and wife, and the wife had been having an affair with the supervisor, which had broken off. This is all true. It's in the court records. And the husband told the wife that we're moving into a new house, so we need to clear the air. So let's take care of the supervisor. So he was gunned down behind at a construction site near Port Arthur, shot with, I think, a 16 gauge about 6 times. And I got involved as a labor attorney with Texaco because it became an issue in the union arbitration. But the wife was convicted because she confessed. I admit it, he did it. And she told how he did it. He was in the trunk of her car when the supervisor was following her out to the construction site, hopped out of the trunk and shot the supervisor when he came over to her car. She was tried. He has never been tried. She will not testify against him. Under Texas law, at least at that time, there was a marital privilege that protected him from her testimony. So long as they remained married, he could not be convicted because they had no other evidence.
I'm going to stop you right there because it clearly sounds like there's more to the story, and I don't want you to give it away because, she's been charged and she's in prison and all that stuff, but he's not. So there's definitely something there that I don't want you to give away, but I do want people to find the story when it comes out and hopefully read it and learn what was going on. Do you have other books that you're working on?
Well, I've got it just in the gestation phase, a Civil War novel, which is based on my family history. And it involves the journey of a wife whose husband is a Confederate soldier and who is wounded in Fredericksburg. And he is has his kneecap shot off. And his leg isn't amputated, but she takes a journey from Western North Carolina by mule and wagon to take him out of the hospital and bring him home. And the book's about the journey.
And during that time, I'm sure there was lots to write about, whether it be the Indians or other battles that she runs into, her struggling, being a woman at that period of time and all that stuff. So that should be an interesting book as well. We are at the end of our show. I do appreciate your time. I look forward to seeing all the books coming out. Real quickly, QL4 is currently out, and the other one is titled again?
The Safecracker.
And that hopefully will be out by fall of this year.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I do appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate this.
Thank you for listening to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. To learn more about Indie Beacon services, to be a guest on the show, or to advertise on our show, please visit our website at indiebeacon.com.